And it is Orange and Blue today, presented by Shop Honda. I am not Cecil Lammy, filling in today, Will Petersen. Be joined by my good buddy Andrew Mason shortly. But that's not Andrew Mason. That's Jake Shapiro to get things kicked off today. Jake, a championship Nuggets day after. And here we are talking a little Denver Broncos because the timing could not be funnier that the Broncos are in mandatory minicamp today, the day after, tomorrow, and then Thursday during the parade. Sean Payton's wanted him under the radar. You can't really get more under the radar than this.
Yeah, a couple different things from the beat writers I found funny. Our guy, Nick Kosmider, tweeting, nothing like going from a championship parade to or championship celebration to mandatory minicamp, because he was in the building last night. And then you have us in the group chat going, there's no better time for Mike Kliss to drop some Broncos news than right now. And it was like 5 minutes after the game had ended last night. So that would have been legendary. It's really cool in the comment section. We're seeing, some really excited Bronco fans that are also Nugget fans in here. Obviously really cool. And I saw this comment, Will, from Brad, Nuggets fan since David Thompson. Sean Payton was sitting directly next to David Thompson during the game. And spent a majority of the game, again, ignoring his wife and talking to David Thompson this time instead of Russell Wilson. So there's your cool little Nuggets Broncos connection from last night.
Okay, that is cool. And we did see Sean Payton and Russell Wilson and Peyton Manning. They were the big three Broncos in the building last night at Ball Arena. And I did hear D-Mac say something really interesting to kick off the drive. And I want to get your thoughts on this, and then we'll get Mason's thoughts when he gets here too. D-Mac said that he could sense at Broncos today that Sean Payton was truly inspired by the Nuggets and the way they built this up and the way they did this. Now, Sean Payton's won a Super Bowl before, so it's not like he isn't used to seeing a championship, but it's been quite some time for him. I do think it's cool that Sean gets to town and the Nuggets take off, and he can sort of share that wisdom with his players of, hey, you guys saw this town capture Nuggets fever. We haven't done squat for 7 years. We need to go do something to get the attention of this town once again.
Yeah, Russell Wilson came to town and Denver won 2 championships. They just weren't in the sports he was playing. So I think he definitely sees some of that and sees what the city can be. A couple notes about odd coaching things throughout this little run here. The first game Sean Payton attended was against the Chicago Bulls for the Denver Nuggets. He grew up in Chicago. He's an Illinois boy. I'm pretty sure he was rooting for the Bulls. Secondarily, I was in Miami. Mike McDaniel was on the screen for both Heat games. He was wearing white, which is the color of the crowd, but very sneakily, he was not wearing any Heat stuff. I think he was rooting for the Nuggets at heart. So that was cool. But no, Will, to answer your question, and I'll let Mace jump in here as soon as I'm done, I think the entire city has been inspired by the Nuggets and breaking this championship drought. And after 50 years of trying, it finally happens with this supreme player who has so many comparisons to Peyton Manning.
Very cool. All right, Jake, we appreciate you hopping in for a minute or two. Let's see here if we can get Mace. You're going to have to shift a little.
Do I have to move over?
Yeah, you might just have to move a little. Make your camera so we can see that pretty face. But we'll get you in there. There he is, Andrew Mason, who was down.
I gotta do it without twisting the table here. So hang on.
All right.
I don't want to sprain my tabletop here. All right. Yeah, this is a little. It's a little. All right. Is that the?
Yeah, we can see it.
Do we have that? All right. Okay.
All right. So Mace, you were down at OTAs today, and we're gonna get to all our topics on the side here in just a moment. But I do want to get your thoughts on what D-Mac started to kick the drive off with. And he said that he could feel Sean Payton inspired by the Denver Nuggets. Did you get any sense of that? And how much Nuggets chatter was there down there today at Broncos?
A fair amount. I mean, I didn't get the same overwhelming vibe regarding the inspiration as D-Mac did. Maybe it's because D-Mac's been down at the Nuggets on a regular basis. I think, if anything, what maybe Sean Payton got was a little bit of a reminder in a good way of like, because Payton's been to the mountaintop as an NFL head coach. So I think what happens when he sees it all coming together is in his mind, he flashes back to his own experiences and how he won a championship and what it meant to that city of New Orleans. And I do think he will kind of point out to players who a lot of guys follow the NBA closely to say, look, I mean, this is what it can be like around here. And then those who were around last year also saw the Avalanche and how that turned the town on as well. Now, that being said, there wasn't any afterglow from the Avs that transferred over to the Broncos last year, obviously. So I'm a little skeptical about just how much you can glean from that in another sport, but I think I think it was something that everybody was thinking about, and definitely a little bit of an afterglow today. But it was pretty cool. But I wouldn't. I think DMAC probably made more of it than was actually there, in my opinion.
I think DMAC's also running on maybe an hour of sleep in the last.
I was stunned he was out there. Like, I looked at him and I said, "How much sleep did you get?" And he's like, "Oh, about 80 minutes or so."
Yeah.
And
so
I
think feeling a little loopy today. A little delirious.
He's a little loopy, a little delirious, but I think he was glad that he came out there when it was Troy Rank of Denver 7 who first noticed it during a punt drill. Pat Surtain getting some coaching from Sean Payton on punt returns. There were other players fielding the punts, but you had Surtain right there. And basically you could kind of see Sean Payton kind of, gesturing as if like to say, okay, you got to kind of judge the arc of the ball, that sort of thing. And I think it's a good place to start because it's a pretty clear contrast from last year to this year. As I wrote in my piece at denversports.com, just a little under 7 months ago, we had Dwayne Stukes, then the special teams coordinator, who referred to this notion as, quote, idiotic, unquote. And now you have Sean Payton, who seems to think that the idea of using Pat Surtain on punt returns, perhaps not definite, and I think this may end up being something that's just kind of a relief option just in case, but the notion of Pat Surtain on teams and on punt returns does have a little bit of merit. That's very fascinating.
All right, a lot to unpack here. So first of all, let's give our guy DMAC some love because Dwayne Stukes, the special teams coordinator who got fired after 15 games, challenged DMAC of a veteran who could return punts. He offered up Pat Surtain II, got called idiotic. Of course, a lot of the Denver media jumped on DMAC and said it was idiotic. And now you hear you got a Super Bowl coach with a ring. And meanwhile, Dwayne Stukes, last time I checked, is still looking for work. So was DMAC validated a little bit today, Mace, that even if not the first punt in week 1, it's not Pat Surtain, maybe it wasn't such a crazy idea to get some of your best athletes, your best playmakers, the football in their hands on punt returns?
I think he was validated a little bit. I think the thing is, though, you have to assume the risk. And that's why when it comes down to it, I don't necessarily think if Pat Surtain ends up factoring on punt returns that this is going to be something where it's a full-time thing. I don't necessarily think it's going to be him being Deion Sanders. I think what it shows is just a willingness to kind of look behind every door at any possibility whatsoever. And this is part and parcel of Sean Payton taking the job and putting his stamp on things. I think just as he's somebody who will give that 7th round undrafted type of receiver an honest look. I mean, you look at Marcus Colston, a 7th round pick in his first year in New Orleans in 2006, and he ends up beating out players with much greater pedigrees and ends up leaving with basically every receiving record in the New Orleans Saints book for career standards. So I think that's just Sean Payton's mindset of, okay, let's take a look at this and see. Let's not dismiss anything just offhand before we at least explore it. Now, look, the Broncos, they have plenty of options on punt returns, and I think we'll see Marvin Mims Jr., the second round pick, at some point come to the forefront there. But why wouldn't you at least think about it? And I think the other thing that was sort of interesting in Sean Payton's response to DMAC today at the press conference was mentioning Lawrence Taylor back in the day for the New York Giants getting involved on special teams when things weren't going well. This is a team where even if you don't have a special teams role, doesn't mean you're not going to be involved and not having some knowledge of what's going on in that phase. I think he doesn't dismiss it and hand it off solely to the assistant coaches in charge of that. I mean, there was one point. I mean, he's during the punt return drill. I mean, remember, with all respect to Nathaniel Hackett, last year during a special teams drill, he just kind of go off with the quarterbacks or shoot the BS, shoot the breeze, blah blah blah. You see, when special teams is going on, Sean Payton's very actively involved. He's watching intently. There was one I noticed at one point during one of the special teams periods, like he's leaning forward. He's got his hands on his knees. He is watching extremely closely, and this is part of his overall team building philosophy. How much he values that phase, as he said back at the league meetings in March. It's an area where you can generate improvement pretty quickly. That's something that Bill Parcells has said in the past and has written about, that special teams is a place where you can make a really big impact immediately when you're a coach coming in and taking the job. The fact that Mike Westhoff is his assistant head coach, his right-hand man over there, and how experienced Westhoff is in that phase, I think that underscores it. What this tells me is just it gives you a sense of for how for Sean Payton every detail matters. That hidden yardage you can get on special teams matters. And if you can get a few more yards by having Pat Surtain back there from time to time, if that's a possibility, I think he's going to explore it.
All right, very interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Broncos special teams have not been good since Super Bowl 50.
They haven't. That was I believe that was the last year that they ranked in the top half of the league in either the Football Outsiders metric or Rick Gosselin's rankings, where he kind of goes through a bunch of categories and comes up with a ranking. Usually the Broncos are have been at or near the bottom of the league, very firmly in the bottom half for the last 7 seasons. So it started in 2016. Actually, that was when some of the woes began the year after, but it wasn't as bad. It hit another level when Brock Olivo came in 2017 and had
22 Janos, baby.
All right.
Sound bites. All right, we've got a ton to get to, so I do want to move on to Albert O. And he's a guy, I know we can't talk too much about what happened. You're going to have to fill me in on the rules. I wasn't there. But what stood out about Albert O today? And Mace, I got to say, I was a huge advocate of Albert O. Mm-hmm. He should have been playing. And then what do you know? Hackett gets fired, and he has some moments in those final 2 weeks. I still think Albert O is part of the Denver Broncos' future. What say you?
Well, it's really interesting. First of all, you start looking at the tight ends. You've got Greg Dulcich, Albert Okwuegbunam. They traded for Adam Troutman, and they signed Chris Manhertz in free agency.
Yep.
I think what they're trying to figure out right now is kind of who fits what roles and who can be the best all-around player. And with Albert O, when I asked Sean Payton about him at the press conference today, he mentioned first and foremost that Albert O could run. That's obvious. He did also say that you're going to get to training camp. We're going to learn more. And of course, the blocking part of it has always been something that that Alberto has struggled at. But we've also seen, based on what Sean Payton was saying about Greg Dulcich, a willingness to use him as the joker in space and kind of move him around, that he's willing to be creative with how he uses players. The thing that he talked about with Alberto, though, that I thought was most interesting is and I think this may be where DMAC also gets some of the NBA, the Nuggets afterglow, is that he's talking about Albert O, and he's talking about how plays like that can kind of build on themselves, that you get that confidence that sets in from making plays like what he made today. Couple of nice catches downfield.
Right.
Beating defenders over the shoulder, over the shoulder grabs. That's probably as much detail as I can get into.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that you being a Mizzou guy, and I know that's one of the reasons why you're keen on Albert Okwuegbunam.
Oh yeah, MIZ for sure.
You and I have ZOU. You and I have watched him for a long time. So we know what kind of skill he has. And the thing is, last year we saw that it wasn't unlocked in even the smallest way until he got some real hands-on coaching from Jerry Rosberg in the final 2 weeks, and kind of had his confidence built up. But it was interesting. So you had late last year, Jerry Rosberg kind of building his confidence on the practice field, and today Sean Payton talking about Albert O building his confidence by making plays in minicamp and practice. So I think I heard that, and I'm like, okay, clearly Sean Payton understands that with Albert O, you've got to build him up a little bit. In this case, it's building up with the plays. But where the NBA thing came and the Nuggets thing came into play is he kind of referenced, Christian Brown having a good game, and how that allowed him to build confidence in what he could do in the future, as part of him with a pretty expansive answer on Albert Okwuegbunam. So a couple of weeks ago,
that's a Kansas guy and a Missouri guy. We got.
I know that's like oil and water. I don't know if you can do that here.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like the light side and the dark side of the force. You're trying to have balance between the two.
Yeah.
I believe Kansas is the dark side, but hey, whatever.
Each their own. I agree with you there.
Whatever trips your trigger. But yeah, it's interesting because 2 weeks ago, Sean Payton was talking about Greg Dulcich after Dulcich was making some plays, and today it's Albert O who's doing that. So I think this tight end position here is probably a little bit more wide open than it may have seemed. And I'd say right now, I think tight end may be the most fascinating position to watch, competitively speaking, when we get to training camp, because I think they're still learning who does what well, and they're trying to figure out who has the greatest skill set and how to use them properly. I mean, and the other thing also, if you have potentially 4 tight ends on the 53, which I think we could easily see, and they're all having, and I think they'll find a way for all of them to have roles. And if that's the case, that's probably taking a little bit away from the wide receiver complement. So keep your eye on that from a roster building perspective.
Well, and while we're on tight ends, fill me in, Mace, on this new sort of run-heavy offense. Does that place even more of an emphasis on tight ends, particularly in the play-action game? Because if defenses are stacking the box, you can catch them on little 10-yard out routes for easy first downs. Is that something that we talked about a lot when Russell Wilson got here last year? Oh, he doesn't really use his tight end. He's never really used a tight end other than Jimmy Graham. Is this going to be the first time in Russ's career that, hey, he needs to learn how to make tight ends a big part of his offense?
I think so, but I also think even though it hasn't been evident in play to date, I think Russell Wilson really wants to make use of the tight ends as well. I mean, I know Russ was excited when they picked Greg Dulcich last year because of his stretch the field ability. So even though Wilson hasn't really done that in the past, I think he understands going forward that that's something that's going to be essential if he's to maximize the years that are remaining in his career. And if he is to now get back to being a top level quarterback. Last year, we're talking about, can he remain a top level quarterback? Now it's a question of, can he actually get back there? And I don't think he's going to get there without having an array of weapons that he can take advantage of, particularly at the tight end position, because it's such an ideal way to create mismatches. I mean, look, you think about the possibilities. If you can just get a little bit of blocking out of Greg Dulcich and Albert O, think of the possibilities of the two of them on the field running routes and maybe, first selling a block and then getting into space. I don't know that any team personnel wise can keep up with two tight ends who have that stretch the field ability like they do. You've just got to round out the rest of their games so you're not telegraphing your intent if and when you've got both of them on the field at the same time. And that's where the proof is going to be in the pudding of what they do as you get into training camp.
All right, some injury news today. Sean Payton confirms that outside linebacker Baron Browning will head for the PUP list for training camp, or at least part of training camp. Fill us in on that. And also, Mace, I know they made Frank Clark official today. It's more and more becoming clear that, they liked Frank Clark, but Frank Clark was more of a reactionary move to this unfortunate news that Baron Browning had to go undergo arthroscopic surgery.
Yeah, I think that's very clear, and Sean Payton kind of made that apparent when he was talking about Frank Clark and Baron Browning today, that the injury did spur that move. I mean, that's fine if that's what's necessary, but it's something to think about as you see how they end up using their edges over the course of the year. Unfortunately for Baron Browning, he's losing very valuable time, not being out there right now because of this injury, this meniscus injury, and then going on the PUP list when training camp starts. So when he gets back, what can you expect from him? Because I don't think you can simply plug him in and have him ready to go just yet. So I think this is a little bit of an admission that you need something more. The one thing I would say also on Frank Clark is this. It wasn't addressed today. Sean Payton didn't say anything specifically about this, but you can't help but wonder if this move would have been deemed necessary if Randy Gregory did not have the extensive injury history that he has. Because the thing is, Jonathan Cooper, he's a guy who has been flashing at OTAs. He's made an impression on his teammates in a positive way. He can be a pretty good rotational guy. He can set the edge well. I'd say Cooper, and we saw it last year on film, Cooper's ahead of Nick Bonito because he's a more complete edge at this point than Bonito is, especially working against the run. But you can trust Cooper, but you can't trust Randy Gregory to be healthy. And now you have Baron Browning with the injury. You did need another dude in there, basically. And and so because of that, that leads to a move like the one that that you saw over the last week. Now with Frank Clark, it was funny mentioning that he wouldn't be out there for minicamp this week. Sean Payton alluded to the fact that Frank Clark's going to be picking up his championship ring in Kansas City. So
interesting.
But that's being a good sport. There shouldn't be a coach in the NFL who wouldn't tell his guy, go get your ring. It's okay if you're not there, which underscores the whole thing of 7 years ago, Brock Osweiler deciding to stay back in Houston for a day of OTAs, rather than go join his then former Bronco teammates at the White House. Dude, there is nobody in the Houston Texans building that would have begrudged you a once-in-a-lifetime chance to go meet the president and celebrate your Super Bowl win. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that was more some hurt feelings from Brock Osweiler.
Yeah, I think so too. And I wonder if he regrets that. Yeah, and I wonder if he regrets that now, Will.
He probably does, because that was certainly the highlight of his career. It was the best football he played those 5-6 games he had to fill in for Peyton Manning on their way to Super Bowl 50. I want to ask you, though, this is a really interesting one to me, Mace, because the floor and the ceiling, or I guess I should say floor and ceiling for Clark and Gregory is fascinating, right? If they're both healthy, they can be two of the top 20 pass rushers in the league. And the Broncos can have their best duo since Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. If they both can't stay on the field, Not Clark hasn't shown that as much. Gregory, that's obviously been a concern. Just Clark with his age. Then Mace, their edge rushing is going to come down to Browning getting back, the guys you mentioned, Cooper, Bonito, and you're looking at one of the worst units in the league, at least on paper. Mace, the amount of come week 9, let's say, we could either be saying edge rushing is a massive strength of this team because Clark and Gregory are making it a nightmare for opposing QBs, or we could say their edge rushing is non-existent, and that's the reason they're losing games because they can't get any pressure on the opposing quarterback.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, frankly, if things are going well and everybody's healthy, you get Baron Browning back, you could be looking at Clark, Gregory, Cooper, Browning, and saying, wow, it's not just the starters, it's the depth. And it would look like 2015 all over again when you had Vaughn and DeMarcus, but you could come in relief with Shaq Barrett and Shane Ray. Like, one of the things that made that special was the fact that you had two guys who could play pretty well coming in rotationally. Now, as Baron Browning gets healthy, I do wonder if he takes some reps, and maybe this is one of those things, Will, where if Frank Clark can stay healthy, and he's shown he can, he's a pretty durable player historically, you wonder if the Broncos think, okay, let's make sure Randy Gregory is ready at the start, and then if something happens, no problem. Baron Browning is up to speed by then and ready to go with Jonathan Cooper, the guy that spells them both and steps in. I wonder if that's maybe deep down, if you gave the truth serum to people in that building, if that's how they might expect this thing to play out over the course of the year, where, you get what you can out of Randy Gregory, and if injury comes, as it has in basically every season that he's played, then by that point, Baron Browning's up to speed and ready to go because you've been able to kind of bring him along judiciously. And then Cooper's that trustworthy guy who can give you 30-40% of the snaps, play at both edge spots. And then you use Nick Bonito kind of as a pass rush specialist when you're ahead. The thing with Bonito right now is he's kind of a one move guy. That one move can keep him employed because pass rushing is a premium skill. But right now, he's not at the point where you can say, okay, let's have him out there every down because he's a liability against the run.
All right, Mace, let's close on some kicker news for a good time because obviously Elliott Fry is in town, but you've made it clear that Elliott Fry is not 100% the answer. You're telling me there was a tryout kicker brought in today. Fill us in on that.
Yeah, Randy Bullock, who's familiar mostly from his time with the Tennessee Titans.
Yep.
Recently, he's been around a decade. Nobody's picked him up. So the Broncos had a few players in for tryouts today, but this week he's definitely the most notable. And I probably can't, because of the restrictions. I guess I can just say it was a good day for Elliott Fry.
A good day for Elliott Fry. Okay, interesting. Yeah. In terms of the kicker thing, why did they cut McManus? Was it a money thing? Was it they just needed to kind of wash everyone from Super Bowl 50 once and for all? Like, why are we sitting here today talking about kickers when a month ago you and I would have thought we're not going to be talking about kickers on Orange and Blue today because Brandon McManus is the kicker?
Well, now that we have learned about Baron Browning's injury and surgery and what was done in terms of bringing in Frank Clark to replace him, I do think we are talking about money having a greater role in this than I believe was initially believed to be the case.
Okay.
Because we looked at the timing, right? Okay, you're like, why don't you do this in March? Yep. Why do this in May? As we see the pieces come together and we see how effectively cutting Jacob Martin and Brandon McManus is what's paying for Frank Clark. I mean, basically, you save $7.57 million by cutting the two of them on this year's cap, and Frank Clark's contract could be worth up to $7.5 million. it's pretty snug how
Yeah.
Clark's contract fits in. I mean, I'm a follow the money guy, as was said in All the President's Men back in the day. Sometimes I think we go kind of searching too deep for things. And I think really the root cause of this is you had a kicker with a big contract. They needed some space to get somebody else in on the edge. They knew someone who's starting caliber. Because like Jacob Martin, with all respect to him, he's a rotational guy who I believe ended up having like a 4.8 million cap figure.
A lot of money. Yeah.
You save 3.8 million on that, but I mean, that's too much for a player who's a rotational guy. Nick Bonito's cheaper. Jonathan Cooper's cheaper. I'd argue Jonathan Cooper is better. Certainly he was ahead of Jacob Martin last year in terms of the edge rusher rotation. So that's how those moves kind of all add up. And I think now that we know about Baron Browning's injury, and know that Browning was not someone that we were seeing out there for OTAs, and we know why he wasn't out there, the pieces kind of fall into place to show that money was the biggest driver of this thing and creating cap space more than anything else, because you bring in a kicker who's going to make less money. I mean, Elliott Fry is going to be a league minimum young guy if you bring him in. A guy like Bullock might be more expensive if they do choose to bring him in. But I also think this is just a process of, okay, let's take a look at another guy and see, make some notes. Look, Bullock had been unemployed for the last 2.5 months. Nobody signed him in free agency. Nobody signed Mason Crosby. Nobody signed Robbie Gold. Nobody signed Ryan Suckup. Okay.
Yep. A lot of names out there. People know those names from fantasy football.
Right. And so they're all sitting out there. They're not going to be immediately plucked. No. Okay.
You'll have your options. Yeah. All right, Mace. Well, there's a lot more to get to tomorrow and then on Thursday as well. Cecil will be back with you on Orange and Blue today, both of those days. You've got a great piece on Surtain already at denversports.com. I'm sure more to come, but that's going to do it for us. This is Orange and Blue Today, presented by Sean Ponda. We appreciate you tuning in.